They are a very hungry people. The Chinese Communist government cannot feed the people.
Ignorance, racism, and complete lies.
If Chinese students want to come here and study Shakespeare in the Federalist Papers, that's what they need to learn from America.
Now, I'm not sure why he would mention Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare did in fact come from England. One of the most common myths that I often hear about China, and that is the fact that there is no freedom in China today. However, if you're trying to do business with China, you have to realize that certain things you say are going to be culturally insensitive.
We're going to be examining the real reason U.S. senators are supporting Hong Kong.
When it comes to China, there's basically two types of foreigners. Those that hate China and those that have been to China. I do like to look at the positive things in life, and I do think there's some really great things that are happening.
People love to speak passionately, and we're going to have an amazing meal right now.
你喝一杯好不好？好啊，好啊，来，我们一起来吧。来啊，来来，好好好，来，道上不要嫌弃我啊。哦，好的。来，来，干杯。
Cyrus Janssen is originally from Florida, the United States. He was an expat in China for over 10 years, with more than 7 years in Shanghai and 3 years in Hong Kong. He met his wife in Shanghai and his daughter was born in Hong Kong. Considering himself a China veteran, he's also very active as a YouTuber and got a lot of attention from the video "Coronavirus: Why This American Expat Supports China."
This point that I start to realize the world is incredibly lucky the coronavirus originated in China. There is not a government in the world that can move as fast and efficiently as the Chinese government. And if this virus originated in Europe, for example, where citizens are allowed to move freely between international borders, the effects could have been catastrophic.
His latest YouTube video is about George Floyd's death and the ongoing protests in America. Because of the pandemic, he's now staying in Canada, and we arranged this video interview from Hong Kong.
Hello, Cyrus. This is Sissy Zhang Jixian from News. First of all, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Cece, thank you so much for having me on tonight. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I watch your YouTube channel and you define yourself as a China veteran. And why is that?
I wouldn't say that I'm an expert and I always have a lot more to learn, but I'm very grateful for my 10 plus years that I got to live in China. And, so I do consider myself a veteran and have a great passion and love for the country of China.
So there have been nationwide protests and violence escalation in the United States at the moment because of the George Floyd's death. What do you think of the deep-rooted racial problem in American society?
I think anybody that there's not a police force in the world that would train you, to arrest somebody and then put your knee on their neck. That's a technique that when you're doing that, you are intending to hurt somebody. It's very clear. If you're doing that position for 7.5 minutes, I believe that you're intending to kill him. And he had a history of a tremendous amount of violence. And a person like that should not be in that position. He was, and he took it to the extreme. And I'm not sure if, why he did that. I think racism was certainly involved. It's a very difficult problem for America to deal with because, unfortunately, racism towards, African Americans has been a very long part of our history. This is not something that is new. When the first Africans came to America, obviously they came as slaves. They've had a very rough history. I mean, even 60 years ago, they were segregated in the United States. We had blacks and whites were separated. They were not allowed to be together. Martin Luther King fought the civil rights movement that did bring a lot of freedoms to the African Americans. However, unfortunately, they've just never been able to close that gap, in society. I think we've made a lot of progress, obviously, with Barack Obama, becoming the first African-American president in our nation's history. But that was only just 4 years ago that he was serving as president. And here we are now, where we're seeing a death like this of George Floyd. We have not seen a black man be killed in that nature. That was very extreme. And I think this is why you're seeing a tremendous reaction, from the American people that, it's enough's enough. It's 2020 right now. I think the whole world has come a long way dealing with racism, this something has to change. And I think this is really going to be a catalyst in America that is going to hopefully, have some significant change for the country.
Like you said, a racial problem has always been a part of American society. But why did it suddenly escalate in recent time?
I think, America has just not been able to, handle the race problem, really well at any point. We just haven't been able to, help that the Black community as much. I think unfortunately, what we know about America right now is, we lead the world in incarcerations. We have a tremendous amount of people in the United States that are incarcerated, and unfortunately, we do have, a large percentage of those people that are in jail, are African American. And it's not so much a society problem, it's more a community problem. And I think what you're looking at is, I think from the United States government, what I would recommend, or what I would want to see done, is I think the government needs to give that communities a lot more support. For instance, the United States, and we spend, hundreds of billions of dollars every year, fighting war around the world. However, I just think that we need to invest that into our own country. What happens if we started building schools and we started building programs that we could actually, help the African American community out more?
Like different states in the U.S., you have like different strategies to help with Black people, with the Black community. But do you think the Trump administration as a whole, do you think Donald Trump himself is setting a good example in dealing with racial problems?
I don't think so. I think that's probably one of the weaknesses of Donald Trump. I wouldn't say that would be a strength of his, is dealing with racial problems. I know that, he does have some, part of the Black community that, voted for him in 2016. And I think, it was amazing to see Donald Trump get elected. I mean, I think the real reason, that Trump was elected in 2016 was the fact that he's very entertaining. In America, we saw him on our television sets as a internet celebrity, if you will. We all knew who Donald Trump was. He had a very entertaining TV show. And, the reality is the way he talks and the way he carries himself, it's a very entertaining.
You're fired. You're fired. You're fired.
When he would go to presidential debates, people wanted to watch him speak. And that is what you need. You need momentum in order to win an election. And so for him, to win that election, was an amazing accomplishment, for him to be able to pull that off. But I don't think that, bringing unity is really one of his things. I think that would certainly be a weakness.
How the police deal with these related protests? Do you think they are doing it in the right way?
I think that the protests, it's interesting because in media, I've seen both sides of the media. The media want to always make sure that you see the very violent acts, the looting, of the fires, of, all of the violence that you want to see. But I've also seen a lot of reports out there where, for instance, some police forces, would come and they would kneel with the protesters. They would all take a moment where they said, look, the protesters are kneeling. And, there's nothing wrong with the protesting of this man dying, because that is something that needs to change in America. You people in 2020, it's hard to believe that in the United States of America, someone can still be killed by the color of their skin. It's happening, though. And so when a group of people are doing a protest, they're doing it peacefully, respectfully. And there's many people that are protesting, peacefully and respectfully. They're kneeling down on the ground. They're taking time to mourn the man, George Floyd, who he was and how he died. And then I've seen police officers and military, kneel right next to them. And they all do the same thing. It's like, look, we understand why you're protesting and we're with you. So for that action, I think is fantastic. And it's great to see that the media in America doesn't cover that enough, both sides coming together. However, I think what we've seen right now is it's taken to the extreme. We've seen, protesters, all of a sudden this presents an opportunity for looting, for, arson, robbery, certainly violence. And that type of action obviously cannot be, condoned, and it's very similar to Hong Kong. I mean, I have a very similar stance in the Hong Kong protests. You cannot resort to violence. Violence will never suit anything. I think personally, my feeling with the American protests, I feel right now is that, we're coming just off of the COVID. We're finally rebounding from the COVID-19 outbreak, but we've seen a tremendous amount of frustration from the American people towards their government and towards the situation. The United States government did a terrible job in handling COVID-19, and, essentially they dropped the ball. And so now, we've had over 100,000 Americans die. We have 40 million unemployed. And so now all of a sudden, you're finally out on the streets and people are taking they're letting their frustrations go. I think it started with George Floyd. I do believe it's also COVID-19 related. People are just frustrated and they're really taking it out. I mean, I do want to say, police officers have the hardest job in the world. Every day that when they go to the work, they have a chance that they might not come home to their family. It is an incredibly difficult job to be a police officer. And I do want to say that 99% of them, probably are fantastic people. I have friends in America that are police officers. They're great people. However, there is a very small minority that is, acting with this malicious hate and intent. And unfortunately, it seems like that minority is maybe even bigger than 1%. So we have to change that in America. That is a very key thing.
The two protests that are happening in both sides, the causes are different. Like what it turns out to be the reality looks so similar.
Yes.
What's your comment on it?
It's interesting. I mean, I think, I think in Hong Kong, that a lot of people in Hong Kong are upset with the government. They want to see change. And I believe that, sometimes people get frustrated. And, for instance, in Hong Kong, you see that I think that in people in Hong Kong, though, they've taken it to a level where, they're really, we have the phrase in English, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. I mean, for instance, the best example I can see is, Joshua Wong and his group is, they're asking, United States senators to sanction Hong Kong economically. And, I don't think that people really understand what that means. If Hong Kong were to get economically sanctioned, they're just hurting themselves by getting economic sanctions on you and inviting, America to come in and meddle in those affairs. I mean, it's interesting. Even now, the United States has said, we believe that the autonomy of Hong Kong does not exist anymore, and we are going to start putting in some trade sanctions. However, the central government in Beijing has made it very clear, that they want to have the one country, two systems to continue. They made it very clear that Hong Kong's autonomy is still there, and the central government is the one who manages Hong Kong. So it's funny to me how we have a third party, the United States, getting involved in this. And ironically, it's going to be the United States that most likely is going to suffer the most, fallout from this if they put these economic sanctions in. Between the country of America and the city of Hong Kong, in 2018, there was $66 billion worth of trade, and that directly affected 188,000 jobs in the United States. This is an important relationship, with Hong Kong. But again, the U.S. is willing to sacrifice that to try to, disrupt what's going on in China. And I just think that, again, that's going to hurt themselves more than mainland China.
Some people said that it's racism that caused the protests that are going on in the United States at the moment. But the Hong Kong protests, it's actually causing racism. What's your comment on that?
There is a lot of actually racism, in the Hong Kong protests as well, because what you're seeing in Hong Kong is that you're seeing a big mainlander sentiment, and I think that's a really tough thing because, I know people in Hong Kong are very passionate about being from Hong Kong. I know they love speaking Cantonese, they're very passionate. They have a unique culture in Hong Kong, and I think that's a wonderful thing. However, I do think, we all know that Hong Kong is part of China. So, and that's what's so amazing about China. But what's also complicated is China has many different, cultures. Obviously you go to the west, to the north, to the south. They're very different. Everyone has different dialects, different types of food.
爱就是最好的跳舞。
我们中国烹饪是两把刀，一把大刀，一把小刀，其实它就在方寸之间。
It's it's a very complicated country compared to say America, where kind of anywhere you go in America, it's pretty similar, right? With the protests in Hong Kong, is the attitude toward mainlanders. I think that Hong Kong right now, it depends on a tremendous amount of revenue from mainlanders. And for instance, I'll give you an example. I was in a hotel once in Hong Kong, and I was sitting in the lobby. And I had a lady come over to me, and she was like, "Oh, are you okay? Is everything fine?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." Now, there was a man that was right next to me, and I guess she assumed that he was from mainland China. And she said, no, you can't sit here. You have to be a guest of this hotel to sit here. You need to leave immediately. And I questioned her. I said, well, I'm not a guest of this hotel. Why does he have to leave just because he's a mainland Chinese and I get to stay because I'm a foreigner? I mean, if the rule is that you have to be a guest in the hotel, then I need to leave as well. And so it was an interesting thing because, as we know, for instance, last year during the October holiday, that's a huge shopping week for Hong Kong. There was, 95% of trips from mainland China were canceled. We've seen a tremendous amount of decline in, flights from mainland China into Hong Kong, hotel bookings. Everything in Hong Kong has been on the decline. Restaurants are closing, retail shops are closing. They're just not getting the business that they used to. However, it's almost, you want to be racist towards mainland Chinese, but mainland Chinese are also the ones that are filling restaurants, filling, plane seats, filling hotel beds. They're providing a great amount of economic support to the city of Hong Kong. Again, I mean, same thing as I always feel that, the future of Hong Kong's success depends on a healthy relationship with China. I think you need to figure out, how do you work with China? How do you keep your culture in Hong Kong, but still be able to work with, mainland China? That's an important question that people need to figure out. You can't separate, right? You can't say, look, I don't want anything to do with mainland China. It's not going to work.